States. President of the Confederate States, Jefferson Davis, called it the nailhead, or the linchpin of the Confederacy. With the fall of Vicksburg on July 4th of 1863, the Confederacy is cut in half. There's no more pork from Arkansas, beef from Texas, or sugar from Louisiana, which is a big source of food supply for the armies of the Confederacy. The blockade runners would bring weapons such as the British Enfields, the main rifle of the Confederacy, down through Mexico, across Texas, and across the Mississippi River here at Vicksburg. When Vicksburg falls, there's no more weapons that are coming across. It begins a slow stranglehold on the heart of the Confederacy. Now, here at Vicksburg, the artillery itself is one of the main pieces to the actual, which leads to the actual surrender of Vicksburg. General Ulysses S. Grant uses his artillery in a form called massing artillery. By the end of the siege, he has over 200 pieces of artillery that at any command he gives, he can have them move to any point to attack any area of the Confederate fortifications. General John C. Pemberton, however, does not use his artillery in that manner. He keeps them spread out. There may be 3 to 4 cannons for every Confederate fortification. Now, this is very good for infantry assaults. On May 19th and May 22nd, the Union charged the Confederate fortifications and were repulsed both times. The artillery in that manner was used very well. But when it comes down to it, when Grant hunkers down and begins to siege, if the Union soldiers are digging their approach trenches to the fortifications and a Confederate artillery emplacement fires upon them, that's 3 cannons. Grant could have as many at our first tour stop, Battery de Goyer. He has, at any given time, 20 to 22 cannon there during the siege. So you have 3 versus 20. I don't know. Those aren't very good odds, though. So Pemberton actually will pull his artillery back and will give the order that they are not to be used until the next assault. Similar to the order, do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes. But that assault is not to come. It is scheduled to happen on July 6th of 1863. But Vicksburg falls on the 4th, July 4th of 1863. Now, the cannon you see behind me is titled Model 1857 United States Army Light Field Howitzer. That's a mouthful to say. It's more commonly known by its nickname as the 12-pound Napoleon. The Napoleon aspect of that name comes from the man who commissioned the piece, Emperor Louis Napoleon III of France. In 1853, he commissioned it. In the 1800s, France was a great military power. And so, as good Americans, when we see a great piece of military equipment, we copy it. We made a few little modifications, made it better, and we have the Model 1857. Now, the 12-pound aspect comes from one of the 4 types of projectiles it could fire. A 12-pound solid shot. It does not explode, it's just a 12-pound solid iron ball, which has been sitting in the sun, so it's very hot right now. But they would use this in a process called ricochet. So they would take the barrel of the cannon and put it parallel or a little depressed toward the ground and fire it. It would bounce and then begin into a roll across the field of battle. They had linear tactics back then, which means they stood shoulder to shoulder and would march in an open field of battle and would return fire on each other. So if you got 100 men across and you're 5 ranks deep and you're in the dead center of that, you're not going anywhere fast. If that hits you in the torso, you're cut in half. If it hits an arm, your arm's gone. When it would begin rolling, and many times it did, men thought that they could stop it with their foot. Now think about the momentum that it was carrying, so they'd stick their foot out to stop it and just take their leg with them as it keeps on trucking. Now that round does not explode, but the Napoleon does fire 2 exploding rounds. Shell, which the popular term shot and shell, that's the shot, here's the shell, it's just a cast hollow solid shot with a charge of black powder in the center. Had 2 pretty ingenious uses here at the Siege of Vicksburg. The Union, would fire a solid shot into the fortifications, making holes or smaller holes, realizing that the shell, having pretty much the same impact force, if you cut a long fuse and then bury it into the fortification, as you would a solid shot, you have a bigger hole, because when it explodes, it would scatter the dirt, scatter the wood, and so the work of 10 solid shots versus maybe the work of 3 shells. The Confederates used shell. They would also cut longer fuses. When Union troops would get hunkered down at the bottom of their fortifications, they would light a fuse and throw it over. Of course, 12 pounds is not very heavy, so if the fuse was cut too long, it would be thrown back. Deadly game of hot potato, if you will. Finally, the Confederate soldiers got tired of the 12-pounders coming back, so they got one of the bigger guys in the group, and they rolled the 32-pound shells over. Those did not find their way back over. Second exploding round is spherical case. It's filled with 72 little musket balls. The idea is it's an anti-personnel round. You want it to explode 10 feet in the air, maybe 10 to 15 feet in front of the incoming infantry, and it would rain the shots forward. 72 men firing at once. That's the idea. Now, though those shells were deadly, they were not the most feared or the most deadly of the cannon you see behind me. That is attributed to canister. It's its name because it's just a tin can, but it's filled with 27-inch-and-a-half cast iron balls. Turns the cannon you see behind me into a giant shotgun. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the buckshot. It has a 20-foot radius span, and it's accurate up to about 400 yards. The problem with that is that the rifles of the day were also accurate to about 400 yards. At that, if you hear your gunner yell, "Load canister," then the approaching infantry can start picking off your horses, and then start picking off your cannoneers. The reason for horses first, you have no horses, you're not moving that gun anywhere quickly. The cannon you see behind me took a team 6 to 8 horses to move fast. You could do it with 4 if you were strapped for horses, but if you're wanting to get out there in a hurry, you need at least 6. Now the cannon you see behind me takes a detachment of 8 men to properly load and fire the gun. You have the number 1 man holding a staff. It's got a sponge on one end and a wooden chock on the other. It's known as a sponge rammer. Right across from him, you have the number 2 man, and he is actually responsible for loading the cannon, and then come back over the man closest to you. Give him a thumbs up, number 3. That's the most important thumb on the artillery detachment. He's going to be covering the vent, hopefully allowing number 1 to extinguish any sparks. And I'll show you that process here in a second. Across from him is number 4. He'll actually be the trigger man. Back here with the leather satchel, it's called a gunner's haversack, you have number 5. And then on the limber chest, which holds the ammunition for the cannon, will be 6 and 7. We have just 6. But those would actually be the more intelligent men of the crew, because they have to be able to set the fuses and anything that the gunner would call out. At this time, the detachment behind me is going to go through just a dry load, and I'll tell you exactly what they're doing as they go through each position. Gunner, dry load.
Get news to post. No!
Number 3 steps in, placing his thumb with the leather thumb stall on it over the vent. Number 1 has already wet the sponge head and is now inserting it into the barrel. We don't hear a hissing noise, which is good, which means that there's a tight seal in the vent. When he pulls it back out, we're going to be listening for a thud. There we go. That means he's created a vacuum, hopefully extinguish any sparks that could be back there. He's going to bring it around, wrap the underside of the barrel. At this time, number 5 has already gone down to the limber chest to retrieve the round. He's brought it back up to number 2, who will place it into the round. Number 1 takes the position known as refusing the shoulder, as he rams the piece to the breech of the cannon, and then steps out. Now this is where number 3 is going to take out a priming wire, or vent prick, which is just a copper or brass wire. He's going to puncture a hole in the powder bag. At the time of the Civil War, they had what was known as fixed ammunition. So the round, as I showed you with canister, it would have a powder bag tied to a wooden shoe known as a sabot or sabot, and that would be attached to the round with steel bands. That way they could just load everything in one swift motion. Now what they're doing is aiming the piece. The gunner has a new piece of technology for the Civil War. Gunner, if you could hold up the pendulum hoss. It just sits on a swivel. It is a pendulum. It allows them to aim on, well, where we are, a hill. In the Mexican-American War, most of their artillery emplacements were on road beds. They were already flattened out. If they weren't, then they would have to dig out a flat area to aim their artillery on. It gives the touchdown signal, or the all-clear signal.
Ready.
The command of ready is given. Number 3 and number 4 will step in at this time. Also new for the Civil War, new technology, a friction primer. This is a large-scale model. Real ones are only about an inch tall. It's just a copper tube, chemicals in the top, similar to a strike anywhere kitchen match. When the wire is pulled, it does a spark into the breech of the cannon, and that is what finally will send the round downrange. Now, what I'm going to have them do is go through an actual load, and they will fire off a round. I will give you ample warning when it's time to cover your ears. Gunner! Gunner, you may commence firing.
Sasha, load!
Now, all the steps that I just took you through, they're actually going to go through a lot quicker since I'm not talking about them. A good cannon crew could actually get off about 3 rounds a minute. The Park Service won't let us try that, though.
Here's the front. Halt. Halt.
Let's get back. Let's get over here in the way.
Ready.
And ladies and gentlemen, now would be the time to cover your ears.
It's not that loud. It's not all that loud. But I remember. It might be if I remember right. Pretty loud.
And there we have it.
We were a little farther away too.
Thank you for visiting the Vicksburg National Military Park today. It will be a hot day today, so do remember to stay hydrated. Our 2 water facilities are here at the visitor center, and then once you're